The sharp, broken glass voice of Brenda Lang sliced through the quiet afternoon air. "This is a respectable neighborhood for respectable white families. We don't want people like you here." The sound of an open palm striking a cheek cracked like a gunshot in the peaceful cul-de-sac. The woman in the flowing crimson silk dress did not flinch, yet a perfect five-fingered mark began to bloom across her flawless skin. Brenda thrust her hand out in disdain. "My husband is a police officer. He runs this town. You should have stayed in the ghetto where you belong." She had no idea that the woman she had just assaulted was engaged to the state director of the FBI. What happens when a racist bully with a superiority complex strikes the future of federal law enforcement? Where are you watching this story from? Like and subscribe to see justice delivered, not gently, but with overwhelming force. The late afternoon sun, a benevolent sphere of molten gold, cast long, languid shadows across the meticulously tended gardens of Oak Ridge Estates. It was a neighborhood built on the quiet hum of money, a place where the soft whisper of automatic sprinklers was the loudest sound, and the most pressing civic concern was the latest homeowners association memo about approved beige tones for mailboxes. Every house stood as a fortress of new money ambition. Grand entrances, three-car garages, landscaping so perfect it looked artificial. This was a sanctuary designed and priced to keep the chaotic realities of the world at a comfortable distance. Into this carefully curated bubble of suburban calm, Sienna Hale arrived not with an explosion, but with the silent, overwhelming force of a tidal wave. Her carriage was a gleaming black Range Rover, the kind of vehicle that looked more at home on the streets of Beverly Hills than in this quiet corner of the state. It purred to a stop in front of the largest house on the cul-de-sac, a sprawling two-story modern colonial that had sat empty for months, the subject of endless speculation among the neighbors. The moving truck that followed was no rented U-Haul, but a massive climate-controlled semi from a company specializing in the relocation of priceless art and antiques. The men who climbed out were not weathered day laborers. They were a uniformed team that moved with the silent efficiency of a special forces unit. Precise movements, low voices. Then the driver's door of the Range Rover opened. A long, elegant leg appeared, followed by the rest of Sienna Hale. The sun caught the fabric of her dress, a simple crimson silk tunic that flowed over her curves like liquid fire. It was a bold statement in a neighborhood of khaki shorts and polo shirts. Sienna was a sculpture come to life, a woman of imposing beauty with deep mahogany skin and a cascade of dark, coiled curls that fell over her shoulders. She was tall, poised, and possessed a figure that could only be described as sculptural. Generous curves that the simple cut of the dress did not hide, but celebrated. She stood for a moment, gazing at her new home with a serene, majestic, completely unreadable expression. She was not merely moving in. She was taking possession. Across the street, behind the immaculate picture window of a slightly smaller but equally pristine house, Brenda Lang watched with white-knuckled intensity, gripping a lukewarm mug of coffee. Brenda, a woman in her 40s with hair a shade too blonde and a smile that never reached her cold, pale blue eyes, considered herself the unofficial queen of Oak Ridge. She was the head of the welcome committee, the organizer of the annual block party, and the chief enforcer of the unwritten rules that governed their perfect little world. Every instinct screamed that the woman in the red dress was a violation. "Derek, you have to see this," Brenda called into the house in a low hiss, never taking her eyes off the scene unfolding across the street. Her husband, Officer Derek Lang, a man whose physical presence had softened from the lean muscle of his academy days into the solid bulk of someone who enjoyed his donuts, lumbered into the living room. He wore his off-duty uniform, cargo shorts and a faded t-shirt stretched tight across his midsection, bearing the logo of his favorite sports team. "See what, honey? Mrs. Gable letting her poodle do its business on my lawn again?" "Worse," Brenda said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Look!" She jerked her chin toward the window. Derek squinted, following her gaze. He saw the moving truck, the team, then Sienna. He let out a low whistle. "Well, hello. Looks like the neighborhood just got a lot more interesting." Brenda shot him a venomous look. "Don't be disgusting, Derek. That's exactly the problem. She's moving into the Henderson place." Derek's interest soured instantly, replaced by confusion and a flicker of irritation. Her? How the hell did she? His mind, conditioned by years of policing a city with sharp racial and economic divides, immediately began sorting possibilities. He did not see a successful woman. He saw a statistical anomaly, a question that demanded a suspicious answer. Drug money, an inheritance, maybe a lawsuit settlement. The idea that she had simply earned it was so remote, he never even considered it. "That's what I'd like to know," Brenda sneered, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "This is a neighborhood for families, Derek. For doctors and lawyers. Not for her." The unspoken word hung between them, dense and ugly. Sienna, unaware of the bitter judgment being passed from the house across the street, walked up the bluestone path toward her new front door. One of the movers, a man with a clipboard, met her there. He spoke to her with a quiet respect that irritated Brenda. Sienna listened, nodded, then produced a keycard. She swiped it, and the heavy oak door opened with a soft, welcoming click. As she crossed the threshold, Sienna turned for one last look at her new domain. Her gaze swept the quiet street, taking in the perfectly identical houses, the immaculate lawns, the sterile, peaceful facade of Oak Ridge Estates. For a brief moment, her eyes rested on the picture window across the way. She could not see the figures behind the glass, but she felt them. She felt their eyes. A lifetime of experience had given her a sixth sense for it, the sensation of being watched, judged, weighed. A small, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. She had hoped for peace, just once. But as she turned and stepped into the cool, empty expanse of her new home, a familiar resignation settled over her heart. The battle, it seemed, had already begun. She had only just arrived, and the first stone had already been thrown. After the moving trucks disappeared, leaving only the faintest impression of their weight on the pristine asphalt of the cul-de-sac, Sienna's new life in Oak Ridge began to take shape. Boxes were unpacked, furniture arranged, and the house slowly transformed from an empty shell into a home that reflected its owner. Elegant, modern, radiating a serene and confident energy. Sienna was in her front garden one afternoon, kneeling under the sun in a wide-brimmed straw hat, simple linen pants, and a sleeveless top, her hands protected by gardening gloves as she carefully tended a bed of wilting hydrangeas the previous owners had neglected. The scent of freshly turned earth and blooming jasmine filled the air. For one fleeting moment there was peace. Then a shadow fell across her. Sienna looked up. A woman stood at the edge of her garden, arms crossed, wearing a smile as bright and artificial as her chemically whitened teeth. It was Brenda Lang, dressed in a pastel pink tennis skirt and an immaculate white polo, the unofficial uniform of the Oak Ridge housewife. "I'm Brenda Lang from across the street," she said in a cheerful voice that sang a melody completely at odds with the coldness in her eyes. "I'm the head of the welcome committee. I've been so busy the last few days I never got a chance to come over and introduce myself." Sienna slowly removed her gardening gloves and rose, brushing the soil from her knees. She stood a full head taller than Brenda, a fact that seemed to surprise and momentarily annoy her new neighbor. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Brenda. I'm Sienna Hale." She offered a warm, genuine smile. It's a beautiful neighborhood. Everyone takes such wonderful care of it. We try, Brenda said, not meeting Sienna's eyes, but casting a quick, critical glance at the house behind her. We have very high standards here in Oak Ridge. It's what keeps property values up, you know. The implication was clear, and you are a potential threat to those standards. Sienna's smile remained unbroken. I understand. I plan to do quite a bit with the landscaping. I thought I'd start by saving these poor hydrangeas. Brenda let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a startled bird. Oh, honey, don't bother. Those are last season's. You'll want to pull all that out and bring in a professional. We all use Bloom and Marvelous. They're a little pricey, but they understand the aesthetic we're going for. She pronounced the word aesthetic as if it were sacred text that Sienna, in her simple gardening clothes, could never comprehend. I'll keep that in mind, Sienna said, her tone still perfectly serene. But I've always liked getting my hands dirty. Of course, Brenda drawled, stretching the words. Her gaze finally settled on Sienna, and her false smile tightened. So, Hale, is that your married name? The question was a probe, a tiny scalpel designed to find a weak point. It will be, Sienna answered softly. For the first time, a warm, genuine light entered her eyes. My fiancé and I are getting married in the fall. How nice, Brenda replied, though her expression soured. A fiancé. That explained the money. She decided some rich man was keeping her. And what does your fiancé do? Doctor? Lawyer? My husband Derek is a police officer, a very respected sergeant. She puffed out her chest slightly, as if the borrowed authority of her husband's badge were a shield she could wield. He works for the government, Sienna said simply. The honest, understated answer felt wonderfully inadequate, and yet perfectly sufficient. She had no intention of laying her life open for this woman's critical inspection. Brenda narrowed her eyes. The government. Ah, like the post office. The condescension was so thick, it could have been cut with a knife. Something like that, Sienna replied, a hint of amusement finally touching the corners of her mouth. The unshakable courtesy and calm were clearly beginning to enrage Brenda. She had come expecting someone easy to intimidate, someone defensive or overly eager to please. Sienna was neither. She was simply serene. It was like throwing stones at a mountain. Well, Brenda said, her cheerful facade finally cracking as her voice took on a harder edge. I just wanted to drop off the Homeowners Association welcome packet. She thrust a thick, glossy folder into Sienna's hands. It has all the rules. Trash can placement. Approved holiday decorations. Noise ordinance. We're very strict about noise, especially at night. No loud music. No big parties. This is a quiet family neighborhood. Every word was a warning. Every rule was a potential weapon. Thank you, Brenda. I'll be sure to read it carefully, Sienna said, accepting the folder. You do that, Brenda replied, turning to leave. She took 2 steps, stopped, and looked back. You know, the Hendersons, the elderly couple who lived here, were lovely people. It's a shame they had to move into a retirement home. We were all hoping another nice family, you know, like us, would move in. Someone the children could play with. Her eyes flicked pointedly to Sienna's flat stomach. Another personal jab. Sienna's composure remained flawless. She simply stood there holding the folder, her face a mask of serene neutrality. She did not take the bait. Frustrated by the lack of reaction, Brenda played her final card. Anyway, welcome to Oak Ridge, she said in a tone more threatening than welcoming. I hope you'll be happy here. She turned and strode across the street, her pink tennis skirt swinging with agitated fury. Sienna watched her go. She looked down at the welcome packet in her hands, a Trojan horse filled with rules designed to be used against her. Then she looked at the wilting hydrangeas, their heads bowed as if defeated, With a deep sigh, she set the packet aside, picked up her trowel, and sank it once more into the rich, dark earth. The welcome had been delivered. It was a declaration of war disguised as a neighborly greeting. And Sienna understood, with a certainty that settled deep into her bones, that this was only the beginning. The thorns were out, and they were pointed directly at her. The days that followed Brenda's welcome turned into a steadily intensifying, low-level war. It was a campaign fought not with open declarations, but with the petty, insidious tactics of a bully who believed herself untouchable. Brenda Lang was the strategist, but her husband, Officer Derek Lang, was the weapon. He used the authority of his badge and the intimidating presence of his patrol car to wage a silent war of nerves against Sienna, a campaign designed to make her feel uncomfortable, watched, and unsafe in her own home. It began subtly. One evening, while Sienna was reading in her living room, a blinding light suddenly flooded the space, drowning out the soft glow of her lamp. She looked up, startled, and saw Derek's patrol car parked directly across the street. The powerful spotlight on the roof aimed straight at her window. It stayed there for a full minute, an invasive, probing stare, before switching off. The cruiser remained parked for another hour, a massive, silent beast in the darkness, before finally rolling away. No siren, no emergency. Only the quiet, threatening statement, "I am watching you." The next day, it was the trash cans. The Homeowners Association rules, as Brenda had so helpfully pointed out, dictated that bins could not be placed at the curb before a certain hour the evening before collection. While Sienna was wheeling her containers to the end of the driveway, Derek's patrol car sat waiting at the corner. The moment she turned her back, he pulled up, got out, and slapped a bright orange violation sticker on the bin. He did not speak. He gave no warning. He simply marked her property and drove off. Another small act of power designed to chip away at her peace. The harassment was constant, a dripping faucet of intimidation. He would park his cruiser several houses away and sit there for hours during his shift, supposedly watching the neighborhood, but always with a clear view of her house. When she left in her Range Rover, he would often start his engine and follow her for a few blocks before peeling off, a reminder that he could run her plates, stop her, and disrupt her life whenever he chose. He never used his lights. He never broke the law, but the message was as clear as the badge on his chest. He was the law in Oak Ridge, and she was the designated target. Sienna documented everything with the quiet precision of a seasoned analyst. She recorded the times, the dates, the specific actions in a secure digital file. The spotlight incident, the trash can violation, the slow, deliberate patrols past her house. She logged it all without emotion, compiling a dossier of harassment as methodical as it was damning. She knew what they wanted. They wanted her to react emotionally. They wanted her to scream, to complain, to give them a reason to escalate. She would give them nothing. Her patience was a weapon, and she wielded it with mastery. One afternoon, Sienna was on a video call in her home office, a beautiful, light-filled room overlooking the front garden. She was speaking with a colleague from a human rights foundation where she volunteered, discussing fundraising strategies for a new clean water project in sub-Saharan Africa. Suddenly, the guttural roar of a powerful engine shattered the peace. She looked out the window and saw Derek Lang, this time off-duty, ostentatiously revving the engine of his massive pickup truck, which he had parked in the street directly in front of her driveway, blocking her exit. The truck was a cartoon of aggressive masculinity, lifted suspension, oversized tires, a collection of crude bumper stickers on the tailgate. He let the engine roar for half a minute, the vibration traveling through the windows of Sienna's office. before finally shutting it off. Then he climbed out with a smug smile and began unloading bags of mulch from the bed, making a show of his physical effort while ensuring the truck remained immobile. "I'm sorry, David," Sienna said into her headset, her voice calm and steady despite the deliberate provocation. "I need to handle a small neighborhood matter. Can I call you back?" She ended the call, rose, and walked to her front door. She did not storm out in anger. She simply opened the door and stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. Derek saw her from the corner of his eye. He ignored her for several minutes, hoisting another bag of mulch onto his shoulder and carrying it into his own yard. Finally, after savoring her attention for as long as he could, he turned toward her. "Got a problem?" he asked, in a tone that mixed feigned innocence with open hostility. "You're blocking my driveway," Sienna said simply. Her voice was not accusatory. It was a statement of fact. Derek wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Am I? Oh, man. I'm so sorry. This truck's so big, you know. Hard to park. Just need a few more minutes. Gotta get this mulch down before it rains." He gestured toward the clear, cloudless blue sky. "I have an appointment I need to keep," Sienna said with unshakable patience. "I need you to move your vehicle right now." The direct, calm order seemed to throw him. He was used to people shrinking in fear or shouting. That quiet, inflexible authority was something he did not know how to handle. His own authority rested on a uniform and a gun. Hers seemed to rise from within. His face hardened. The pretense of neighborly ignorance vanished. "You know what the problem is with people like you," he said, taking a threatening step onto her lawn. "You move into a place like this and think you can start making demands like you own the place. This is my neighborhood. I've lived here for years. You've been here a week. Learn your place." Sienna did not flinch. "My place is inside my house, which I own, and your truck is on public property, illegally obstructing my access to that house. If you do not move it in the next 60 seconds, I will be forced to call a tow truck. Then I will call your station and file a formal harassment complaint with your commander. I'm sure he will be very interested to know how his sergeants spend their free time." Derek's face flushed crimson with rage. He was being challenged, not with emotion, but with logic and the law, his supposed domain. The threat of calling his captain was a direct hit. He knew that kind of complaint, even if it would probably be buried, would still be an unnecessary headache. He stared at her for a long, silent moment, jaw clenched. He wanted to say something more, something ugly, but her steady gaze held him. She was not afraid of him. That was the most infuriating part. Finally, muttering a curse under his breath, he turned, stomped back to his truck, and climbed in. He started the engine with another ugly roar, revving it one last time in a final display of impotent aggression. Then, with a squeal of oversized tires, he lurched the truck forward 6 meters, clearing the driveway. Sienna watched him go. She did not thank him sarcastically. She did not look triumphant. She simply turned, walked back inside, and closed the door. The pattern was now crystal clear. The Langs did not see her as a neighbor. They saw her as an infestation that needed to be driven out. They used their power, both official and social, as a weapon. But they had made a fatal mistake. They assumed they were attacking someone weak. They had no idea they were challenging a force so far beyond them that it was almost absurd. The badge-wearing bully had just been put on notice, and the consequences of his actions were beginning to compound like interest on a debt that would soon come due. The fragile appearance of civility, already cracked and peeling, finally shattered on one bright morning. The confrontation over the blocked driveway had been a turning point. Derek Lang's failure to intimidate Sienna had only hardened his wife's resolve. Brenda's prejudice, once camouflaged in the passive-aggressive language of homeowners association rules and veiled insults, now shed its skin, revealing the raw, ugly racism underneath. She was finished with subtlety. She wanted war. The flashpoint, as so often happens in suburban disputes, was laughably trivial. Sienna had hired a courier service to deliver several large-framed, abstract paintings she had recently purchased at a gallery auction. The clearly marked delivery van had pulled up to the curb. Two uniformed men were carefully unloading a large canvas wrapped in bubble wrap. That was when Brenda Lang stormed out of her front door. "What is this? What's going on?" she demanded, marching straight onto Sienna's lawn, hands planted firmly on her hips. Her voice was shrill enough that neighbors 2 houses away stopped their weekend chores and looked over. The delivery men, both young Latino men, stared at her in confusion. "We're just making a delivery, ma'am," one of them said politely. "A delivery of what?" Brenda snapped, eyeing the large canvas with suspicion, as if it might contain contraband. "You can't block the street with a commercial vehicle. This is a residential zone." The van was parked legally, hazard lights flashing, obstructing nothing. Sienna, who had been directing the men from the open doorway, stepped out onto the porch. She wore a simple, elegant white summer dress, a stark contrast to Brenda's furious energy. "It's all right, Brenda," Sienna said in a calm, serene voice, a soothing balm against Brenda's harsh screech. "Just a few more minutes. They're bringing in some of my artwork." Brenda spun to face her, features twisted into a mask of indignation. "Artwork? Is that what we're calling it? This is exactly what I was talking about. Commercial deliveries, strange vans, people who don't belong here wandering around." Her gaze flicked with open disdain to the 2 delivery men, now awkwardly holding the heavy piece. "They are professionals doing their job," Sienna said, her voice losing a little of its warmth and taking on a cool, firm edge. "And they do belong here, because they were invited by me, the owner of this house. I would appreciate it if you stopped harassing them and returned to your own property." The direct order was like gasoline on a fire. Brenda's face flushed a deep red. "My property? This entire neighborhood is my business. I've lived here for years. I've worked hard to build a safe, clean, respectable community. And then you show up." She took another step closer, pointing a trembling finger at Sienna. "You, with your flashy car and your mysterious government fiancé. We don't know who you are. We don't know where your money comes from. For all we know, you're a drug dealer or some high-class prostitute." The poisonous, absurd words hung in the pristine morning air. The delivery men's eyes went wide. Across the street, Mr. Henderson, who had been pruning his roses, froze with his shears halfway to a bloom. Sienna's expression did not change. Her face remained serene and unreadable, but a dangerous stillness settled over her. She descended the 2 porch steps, moving with slow, measured grace, until she stood on the grass only a few meters from Brenda. "You're making a scene, Brenda," Sienna said, lowering her voice to a soft tone that somehow felt more intimidating than a shout. "You're embarrassing yourself." "I'm protecting my investment," Brenda screeched, her voice cracking with fury. "I don't want people like you here. This is a good neighborhood, a family neighborhood for respectable white families. We don't want people like you devaluing the properties and bringing in crime. Why don't you go back to the ghetto you crawled out of?" There it was. The poison had been unleashed. The racism, no longer veiled, stood naked for the entire cul-de-sac to see. It was raw, ugly, and unmistakable. Ugly, and Sienna stood firm. She was a statue of dignity in the face of a hurricane of hatred. She did not raise her voice. She did not trade insults. She simply looked at Brenda with a mixture of pity and contempt. "You're a sad, frightened woman, Brenda," Sienna said quietly. "Your world is so small, and your heart is so full of hate. I almost feel sorry for you." The pity was the final insult. Brenda, who considered herself powerful, the queen of her domain, could not bear to be pitied by this woman. All the frustration, jealousy, and racist rage that had been simmering for days exploded. "Don't you dare feel sorry for me!" she screamed. And then she attacked. It was not a calculated punch. It was a wild, open-palmed slap, born of uncontrolled fury. The movement was clumsy, telegraphed, and utterly shocking in its execution. The quiet of the morning was shattered by the sharp, ugly sound of flesh striking flesh. Crack. The sound was a gunshot in the peaceful cul-de-sac. It echoed off the identical facades of the houses, a visceral, violent intrusion into their peaceful world. Sienna's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow. Her straw hat tumbled from her head and rolled across the perfectly manicured lawn. For one terrifying instant, everything went silent. The birds stopped singing. The delivery men stood frozen. Mr. Henderson slowly, deliberately, set down his shears. Sienna turned her head to face her attacker. Her gaze, once serene, was now cold and hard as obsidian. On her flawless brown cheek, the perfect imprint of Brenda's 5 fingers began to bloom, a vivid red mark against her skin. It was the brand of a hate crime committed under the bright morning sun. Brenda stood there, chest heaving, hand still slightly raised, adrenaline surging through her veins. She had expected fear, tears, a panicked retreat. She had expected to see her victim crumble. She saw none of that. Sienna did not cry out. She simply stood there, absorbing the attack, her eyes locked on Brenda's with terrifying intensity. "My husband is a police officer," Brenda blurted, the words a desperate, reflexive assertion of the power she believed she possessed. "He runs this town. You should have stayed in the ghetto where you belong." Sienna said nothing. She did not need to. They had not merely crossed a line. They had erased it. The act of physical violence committed on her property in front of witnesses had changed everything. This was no longer a simple neighborhood dispute. It was a federal crime. Brenda watched the silent, powerful stillness of Sienna, and for the first time a flicker of fear cut through her rage. She had just assaulted a woman who refused to be a victim. She had struck a rock, and her own hand was beginning to throb. Trembling but trying to hold on to her bravado, Brenda spun on her heel. "You'll be hearing from my husband's lawyer," she spat, a final, pathetic threat, then stormed across the street without looking back and slammed her front door. The sound echoed the slap, the final punctuation mark on her act of war. Sienna stood alone in her garden. The delivery men stared at her with a mixture of shock and concern. "Ma'am, are you all right? Should we call the police?" one of them asked in a shaky voice. Sienna bent and picked up her fallen hat. She settled it back on her head with calm, measured movements. She turned to the 2 men. "No," she said in a voice that was perfectly steady, though it now carried a cold, hard edge of steel. "Don't call the police." She looked up at the pristine blue sky. "I have my own people for that." The hook had been set. The trap had been sprung. And Brenda Lang, in her racist rage, had just sealed not only her own fate, but that of her husband, her home, and her entire life. She had slapped a queen without the faintest idea that the king was watching. Sienna watched the Lang's front door slam shut. The sound was a final, definitive period at the end of the morning's ugly sentence. She remained still for a moment. The throb in her cheek was a dull, rhythmic reminder of the violation. The 2 delivery men still stood frozen, holding the heavy artwork, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They were waiting for a signal, any signal, of what to do in a situation that had spiraled far beyond anything they had signed up for. With a chilling serenity that seemed almost unnatural, Sienna turned to them. The fury that should have been on her face was gone, replaced by a glacial, focused calm. "Please bring that inside," she said, in a voice as soft and cool as the silk dress she had worn the day she arrived. Lean it against the back wall of the living room. Then I'll need your names and contact information. My attorney will be in touch, so you can give witness statements." The men, visibly relieved to be given a clear, simple task, nodded quickly and hurried to obey. They carried the heavy canvas into the house, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent entryway. Sienna followed them inside and closed the heavy oak door behind her. The click of the lock was a definitive sound. It sealed her inside her sanctuary and locked the Langs into a world of consequences they could not yet imagine. Once the delivery men had placed the artwork, given their information with trembling hands, and left with a quiet, "God bless you, ma'am," Sienna was alone. She did not rush to a mirror to inspect the damage. She did not collapse onto a sofa and cry. She did not pace furiously through the rooms. Instead, she walked with firm, measured steps into her home office. The room was her command center, a space of minimalist design, with clean lines and cutting-edge technology seamlessly integrated into the decor. She sat in the leather chair behind her large mahogany desk. Her first action was to pick up her smartphone. She activated the front-facing camera. The screen illuminated her face, showing the vivid red welt on her cheek in high definition and sharp detail. The imprint of Brenda's 4 fingers and palm was unmistakable. She took several clear, well-lit photographs from different angles, her expression as neutral and objective as a crime scene photographer's. This was not a victim's selfie. It was the documentation of evidence. Her second action was to tap an icon on her computer. A secure video application loaded instantly. With a few clicks, she accessed the recordings from her security system. The cameras, discreetly hidden in the soffits of the roof and among the landscaping, were not standard equipment. They accorded in 4K resolution with crystal clear audio. She located the file covering the last several minutes. She watched the entire incident on the screen, a silent observer of her own assault. She saw Brenda storm onto her lawn. She heard every racist, venomous word captured with perfect fidelity by the directional microphones. She watched the slap, the horrible crack of impact, and her own head snapping to the side. She saved a copy of the video file to a triple encrypted solid-state drive, labeling it simply assault_Lang. Only then, with the evidence secured and cataloged, did she allow herself a moment. She leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and drew a deep, purifying breath. She let the rage she had so carefully contained wash over her, not as a chaotic flood, but as a controlled burn. It was a cold, pure, righteous fury. It was the anger of a woman who had endured 1,000 small wounds of prejudice in her life and was now facing a blatant act of physical violence fueled by that same hatred. After exactly 1 minute of controlled rage, she opened her eyes. The fire banked itself into fuel. She picked up a second phone from her desk, a sleek, unmarked black device with no brand markings. It was a satellite phone connected to a secure network, invisible to conventional cellular tracking. She pressed a single speed dial button. The phone did not ring. The line simply connected with a soft click. "Cade," a deep, resonant voice answered. There was no hello, no preamble, only the name. "Adrian, it's me," Sienna said, her voice betraying none of the trauma she had just endured. "Sienna, are you all right? You're on the secondary line." The concern in his voice was immediate and palpable, cutting through his professional tone. "I'm fine, Adrian, but we have a problem," she said. "Talk to me. My new neighbor, Brenda Lang, just assaulted me on the front lawn of my house." There was a sepulchral silence on the other end of the line. For several seconds, the only sound was the soft hiss of the satellite connection. Adrian Crowe, State Director of the FBI, a man who dealt with terrorists, cartel leaders, and serial killers, was processing the fact that someone had dared to lay a hand on his fiancée. "Define assault," he said at last, his voice dangerously low, stripped of all warmth. It was the voice he used in interrogation rooms, the voice that made hardened criminals confess. "She slapped me hard," Sienna reported, as if reading a field report. The entire incident was preceded by a racist rant. "Everything is on video. I have 2 independent witnesses. Are you injured? Do you need a medical team?" "No, just an ugly bruise." But Adrian, her husband is a sergeant with the local police. She made that very clear. His name is Derek Lang. Another pause, shorter, more threatening. "I know who he is," Adrian said. His voice was pure ice. "He's on his department's internal affairs watch list. Multiple complaints for excessive force, all dismissed. That explains the harassment this past week. He's been harassing you." The glacial edge in Adrian's voice began to burn. "Low-intensity intimidation. Using his patrol car to watch the house. Blocking my driveway. I've documented everything." "Good," Adrian said. "That establishes a pattern. This isn't just an assault, Sienna. It's a hate crime, and it's part of a conspiracy to deprive you of your civil rights under color of law. We have them." "What's the protocol, Adrian?" Sienna asked. "The protocol is that we burn them to the ground," he said. The raw, protective fury finally broke through his control. He took a deep breath and locked it down again. "All right, listen carefully. Do not call the local police. They will bury it, and we need to document their inaction. Tactical and surveillance teams are already being spun up. I'm activating the overnight security protocol. Your house is now a federal operations zone. Are you safe staying there?" "I'm completely safe," Sienna confirmed. "She's locked herself in the house across the street." "Good. Stay inside. Do not engage. Do not open the door. I'm rerouting. I'll be there soon. By the time I arrive, we'll have a complete physical and digital perimeter. We'll own them, Sienna. Every email, every text, every dirty little secret. They have no idea what they've done." "I know," Sienna said quietly. "I love you," he said. The words were a fierce, protective promise. "I love you too," she answered. She ended the call. The storm had been unleashed. The conversation, which had lasted less than 3 minutes, had activated a response from the highest levels of federal authority. Brenda Lang, in her ignorant fury, believed she had won a neighborhood skirmish. She had no idea she had just declared war on the United States government. Sienna leaned back in her chair. A single cold tear of anger and relief finally traced a path down her uninjured cheek. The waiting had begun. Across the street, in the beige and gray sanctuary of the Lang house, the atmosphere was one of triumphant excitement and adrenaline. Brenda Lang paced her living room, face still flushed from the confrontation, telling the story for the 3rd time to her husband, Derek. With each retelling, her actions became more heroic, more justified, and Sienna's supposed provocations more outrageous. "And then she had the nerve to say she felt sorry for me," Brenda spat, clenching her fists. "Can you believe that? Sorry for me. So I slapped her, right across that smug, arrogant face. You should have seen her expression." Derek, who had been listening from his favorite armchair with a mixture of apprehension and pride, took a long pull from his beer. A part of him, the part that was still a cop with a survival instinct, knew this was bad. Striking another person was assault, battery, a crime. But that part of him was drowned out by the deeper, darker satisfaction of watching his wife enforce the tribal boundaries he cherished. The black woman had been put in her place. His wife had done what he, with his badge, had only been able to do through minor harassment. She had resorted to violence. "Good for you, honey," he said, setting the beer down. "She had it coming. These people only understand one thing. You have to show them who's boss. Exactly, Brenda said, beaming. She felt powerful, validated. She had defended her neighborhood, her values. And you know what's best? She didn't do a thing. She just stood there. Then she grabbed those 2 delivery guys and hurried inside. She knows better than to call the cops, Derek said with a confident smile. She knows who runs things around here. Who's she going to call? Me? I'll write the report myself. Sorry, ma'am. Looks like a simple misunderstanding between neighbors. Nothing we can do. I'll lose the paperwork before the ink dries. He chuckled at his own casual corruption. It was a well-worn path for him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, savoring the glow of their apparent victory. The afternoon sun poured through the picture window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a perfect, peaceful suburban afternoon, made even more perfect by the successful repulsion of an unwanted intruder. As the hours passed, their confidence grew. They watched Sienna's house from the window. No visitors, no police cars parked in the cul-de-sac. The silence across the street seemed like irrefutable proof of Sienna's fear and submission. See? Brenda said while preparing dinner. Nothing. She's terrified. She knows she can't win. We won, Derek. We showed her that Oak Ridge isn't for her. Damn right, Derek said, pulling another beer from the refrigerator. Maybe now she'll get the message. Put the house back on the market and go back where she came from. Their arrogance was a fortress built on a foundation of prejudice and a lifetime of unearned privilege. They had never faced real consequences for their actions. Derek's minor infractions at work were always smoothed over by his union rep or his captain, men who shared his outdated views. Brenda's social aggressions were always aimed at people she considered inferior, people without the resources or the will to fight back. They operated in a bubble where their power was absolute and their judgment was law. The idea that Sienna might be something more than a frightened, isolated victim was incomprehensible to them. They ate dinner at the dining room table with a clear view of Sienna's front door. They spoke loudly and cheerfully, hoping she could hear them, a small act of psychological dominance. They planned their next move. Tomorrow, Brenda said, swirling the wine in her glass. You should look into that fiancé of hers, the government one. See what you can dig up. I bet he's got a record. I bet they're both criminals. Already planned, Derek said around a mouthful of steak. I'll use the terminal at the station. Run a full background. See what skeletons fall out of the closet. Maybe we can get a warrant. Toss the place. Oh, Derek, that would be wonderful. Brenda clapped her hands like a child promised a present. What a tantrum. Can you imagine her face? They laughed together, a cruel, ugly sound, absorbed by the soundproofed walls of their house. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their victory that they never noticed the small, unmarked van, parked 3 blocks away, its roof bristling with a sophisticated array of microwave antennas. They never noticed the subtle shift in the digital background noise of their home when their Wi-Fi network was silently compromised. And they never noticed at all the almost invisible drone, no larger than a dragonfly, that had lifted off from the van and now hovered silently 12 meters above their roof, its high-resolution thermal camera recording the heat signatures of every person inside the house. The Langs believed they were safe in their castle, celebrating a successful siege. In reality, they were prisoners in a glass cage, performing for an audience they could not see. Their boasting, their scheming, every word they spoke was being captured, analyzed, and logged as evidence. Their victory was an illusion, and their arrogance was the noose they were cheerfully tying around their own necks. Justice was not sleeping. It was simply gathering strength. And the silence across the street was not the silence of fear. It was the calm, patient silence of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Inside her quiet house, Sienna sat on a comfortable cream-colored sofa with a tablet on her lap. The large screen on the living room wall that normally displayed a rotating collection of digital art now showed a four-way split view of the Lang house. The images were sharp, transmitted directly from the assets Director Adrian Crow's team had deployed with terrifying speed. One to camera, from the drone, offered a high-altitude thermal view. 2 heat signatures, one male, one female, moved through the ground floor. A second camera, a pinhole lens expertly placed by a covert entry team inside a birdhouse on a neighboring property, provided a clear image of the Lang's backyard and kitchen window. The third and fourth feeds were not video, but cascading lines of data, a real-time capture of all worryless traffic emanating from the Lang house. Adrian's face appeared in a small window in the corner of the screen, video calling from the command van. His expression was grim, a mask of cold fury. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, a headset around his neck. He looked less like a bureaucrat and more like a field commander, directing a battle. "Thermal shows they're in the dining room," Adrian said in a low growl in her ear. "Audio is live. The parabolic mic in the backyard is getting a clean signal through the window glass. Let's hear what the happy couple is cooking up." An analyst in the van patched in the audio. The voices of Brenda and Derek Lang filled Sienna's living room, unfiltered and ugly. "Run a full background check," Derek's voice boasted. "See what skeletons come out of the closet. Maybe we can get a warrant. Toss the place." "Oh, Derek, that would be wonderful," Brenda's voice answered with a giggle. "A real raid. Can you imagine her face?" Sienna listened, her face impassive. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a nature documentary about 2 particularly stupid and vicious predators walking into a hunter's trap. They're admitting conspiracy to commit illegal searches and seizures and abuse of police databases, Adrian stated flatly. "Add it to the list. Every word they say is another nail in their coffin." "They really believe they've won," Sienna said, a trace of disbelief in her voice. "Their arrogance has no limits." "It's the shield of mediocrity, Sienna," Adrian said, his gaze steady. "They've never been truly challenged. They've only ever bullied people they knew couldn't fight back. They can't conceive of a reality where their actions have real consequences. But they're about to get a very abrupt education." He paused. "How's your face?" "It hurts," she admitted quietly. "But the swelling is going down. The medical team you sent in through the back was very discreet." "They're the best," Adrian said. He looked away from the camera for a moment, speaking to someone in the van. "Sato, they've already breached the finances." He turned back to Sienna. "We're not just looking at the assault. Men like Derek Lang, cops who abuse their power. It's never just one thing. It's a pattern. It's deep rot." A new window appeared on Sienna's screen, showing spreadsheets and bank statements. "We're in," Adrian said with grim satisfaction. "Looks like the Langs have some undeclared cash deposits. Small amounts, a few hundred here and there, deposited the day after his shifts. Consistent with shaking down traffic stops or squeezing low-level criminals. And Brenda Lang has a series of very interesting payments to a private investigator. Seems she likes digging up dirt on anyone in the neighborhood she doesn't like." "This is more than I imagined," Sienna said, feeling a chill despite the warmth of her home. It wasn't just racism. It was a deep, spiritual corruption. "Hate is never an isolated emotion," Adrian said. "It's a symptom of a larger disease. Greed, insecurity, a desperate need for control. It's all there." He looked at her with softer eyes. "I'm sorry you had to be the target of this, my love. When I helped you get this house, I checked the neighborhood. It was supposed to be safe. Quiet." "It's not your fault, Adrian," she said firmly. "You can't predict this kind of poison, but you can remove it. And that's what we're doing." She looked back at the screen, where the thermal signatures of the Langs had settled in their living room, in front of the flickering blue light of a television. They looked so normal, so mundane. two people in a house watching television on an ordinary evening. But the invisible eyes of justice were watching them, peeling back their secrets layer by layer. The house was no longer just a house. It was a terrarium. And the two creatures inside had no idea they were being studied, every movement documented, while the net of federal power closed silently around them. The system Sienna was monitoring had been a housewarming gift from Adrian. Not just cameras, but a fully integrated counter-surveillance and evidence collection system camouflaged as a smart home package. It was a testament to his protective nature and a weapon the Langs had unknowingly armed against themselves. Their comfortable home had become their tomb. Following Adrian's strategic advice, Sienna went to the 12th Precinct, the station where Sergeant Derek Lang worked. The purpose of the visit was twofold. First, to file an official complaint and create a formal record of the assault. Second, to document the inevitable institutional failure of the local department to police its own. It was a necessary move in the legal chess game, a play designed to checkmate the king by first proving that all his pawns were corrupt. The precinct was a grim 1970s brick building that smelled of stale coffee, industrial cleaner, and quiet despair. It was a place where hope went to die under flickering fluorescent lights. Sienna, dressed in an elegant conservative navy pantsuit with her hair pulled into a severe bun, walked through the door with the same unshakable poise she displayed in every other aspect of her life. The bruise on her cheek was still visible, though she had skillfully covered it with concealer. It was no longer a vivid, furious red, but a yellowish purple that still betrayed a significant impact. She approached the reception desk, where a bored-looking sergeant was scrolling on his phone. He looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to a mixture of surprise and suspicion as he took in her expensive suit and the color of her skin. In this part of the city, women who looked like Sienna were usually high-priced attorneys, not civilians filing complaints. "Can I help you?" he asked in a flat tone. "Yes," Sienna replied in a quiet, professional voice. "I need to file a formal complaint for assault against a civilian. I would also like to file a harassment complaint against one of your officers, Sergeant Derek Lang." The desk sergeant's eyebrows rose. He set his phone down. Mentioning a specific officer, especially a sergeant, changed the entire dynamic. "You want to file a complaint against Sergeant Lang?" he asked, his voice now laced with disbelief and a hint of hostility. "That's correct," Sienna said. He stared at her for a long moment, then sighed and picked up the phone on his desk. "Captain Harlan," he growled into the receiver. "There's a woman here. Wants to file on Lang." He listened for a moment. "Yeah, okay." He hung up and looked at Sienna. "Captain wants to see you. Third door on the left." Sienna followed his directions down a dingy hallway to an office with Captain Frank Harlan etched into the frosted glass. She knocked once. "Come in," a raspy voice barked. The office was small and cluttered, dominated by a large metal desk and a wall covered in plaques and yellowed photographs of Harlan shaking hands with local politicians. Captain Harlan was a man in his 50s, with a face mapped by whiskey veins and a belly that strained the buttons of his uniform shirt. He looked like someone who had been sitting behind that same desk for 20 years, his idealism eroding day by day, replaced by a cynical, weary tribalism. His tribe was his officers, and his primary job, as he saw it, was to protect them from the outside world. "Have a seat," he said, gesturing to a rickety wooden chair without looking up from the report he was reading. Sienna sat and waited in silence. Finally, Harlan set the report aside and looked at her, his gaze lingering on the bruise on her cheek. "So," he said, leaning back in his creaking chair, "the desk sergeant tells me you've got a problem with one of my men, Sergeant Lang." "Yes, I do," Sienna said. On Saturday morning, his wife, Brenda Lang, physically assaulted me on my property. Sergeant Lang has also been involved in a campaign of harassment against me for the past week." Harlan picked up a pen and tapped it against his desk. "Assaulted you? That's a strong word. What exactly happened?" Sienna calmly and objectively recounted the events of that morning. She described Brenda's racist rant, the unprovoked slap, and the presence of the 2 delivery men who had witnessed the entire incident. Then she detailed Derek Lang's prior actions: the spotlight, the trash can violation, the blocked driveway. She presented the facts without emotion or embellishment. Harlan listened with an unreadable expression. When she finished, he stopped tapping the pen. "Okay, and what did you do to provoke Mrs. Lang?" he asked. The question was a classic blame-the-victim tactic. Sienna did not flinch. "I asked her to stop harassing the delivery men who were at my house, and I remained on my own lawn." "Right," Harlan said. He opened a desk drawer and pulled out a sheet of paper. He slid it toward her. It was a preliminary incident report. The complainant was listed as Brenda Lang. The narrative, written in Derek Lang's thick handwriting, told a very different story. It claimed that an unidentified woman, Sienna, had become verbally aggressive and threatening toward Mrs. Lang, causing her to feel unsafe and retreat into her house. There was no mention of a slap or a racist tirade. It was a complete fabrication filed preemptively to poison the well. "See, this is my problem," Harlan said, tapping the report. "I already have a statement from that morning, and it tells a different story. It says you were the aggressor." "That report is a lie, Captain," Sienna said, her voice icy. "And it was filed by the husband of the woman who assaulted me. It's a clear conflict of interest." "What it is," Harlan said, his voice hardening, "is the word of a decorated sergeant in my department against yours." He let the word hang in the air, waiting with unspoken prejudice. "Do you have any proof of this alleged assault?" "I have 2 witnesses and a video recording of the entire incident," Sienna stated. Harlan's eyes narrowed slightly at the mention of video. "A video from my home security system," Sienna corrected. "Well," Harlan said, leaning back again and steepling his fingers over his stomach, "you can submit that video as evidence. We'll look at it. But frankly, this looks like a classic case of he said, she said. A simple neighborhood spat that got out of hand. My advice is you go home and try to get along with your neighbors. Filing a complaint like this against an officer's wife is only going to make things harder for you in the long run." It was a threat delivered with the paternalistic air of a man offering friendly advice. Sienna stood. The checkmate was complete. She had given the department the chance to act, and they had officially chosen a captain to obstruct justice and protect their own. "Thank you for your time, Captain," she said in a voice devoid of emotion. "You've made the department's position perfectly clear." She turned and walked out of the office, leaving Captain Harlan sitting behind his desk, confident he had successfully quashed another inconvenient complaint. He had no idea that their entire conversation, every word of his dismissive, threatening advice, had been recorded with perfect clarity by a microtransmitter disguised as a pen in her hand. He thought he was burying a complaint. In reality, he was only digging a deeper hole for his own career and for his entire precinct. Bolstered by Captain Harlan's assurance that Sienna's complaint had been handled, the Langs felt invincible. The system they trusted had worked exactly as designed. It had protected them. To celebrate their triumph and further consolidate their position as the dominant force on the cul-de-sac, they decided to throw an impromptu backyard barbecue that evening, a victory party, a gathering of their loyal subjects to celebrate the successful defense against the outsider. The guest list was a carefully curated selection of their closest friends and neighbors, people who shared their worldview and their prejudices. There was Carl, another officer from Derek's precinct, who laughed uproariously at his racist jokes, and their respective wives, who formed Brenda's circle of suburban gossips. They gathered in the Langs' meticulously landscaped backyard, a space of pavers, an expensive Weber grill, and perfectly arranged outdoor furniture. The air smelled of grilled meat, cheap beer, and simmering resentment. They were completely unaware that their private celebration was actually a live performance for a federal audience. A high-powered parabolic microphone, discreetly nestled in the dense foliage of a large oak in the neighboring yard, was aimed directly at their patio. Every boast, every insult, every conspiratorial whisper was transmitted straight to the FBI command unit, where analysts recorded and transcribed the conversation in real time. "I'm telling you, you should have seen her face when Harlan showed her my report," Derek said, standing by the grill with a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other. He was exaggerating the story of Sienna's visit. She walked in like the Queen of England and walked out looking like she'd just been slapped again. His friend Carl roared with laughter. "That's Frank Harlan for you. He knows how to take care of his guys. He buried that complaint so deep they won't find it with a shovel." "Damn right," Derek said, flipping a row of burgers with a flourish. "She pulled out some nonsense about a video. Harlan told her to go home and be a good neighbor. Basically told her to shut up and know her place." Meanwhile, Brenda held court on the other side of the patio, sipping a glass of Chardonnay and accepting the praise of the other wives. "You're so brave, Brenda," said one of them, a woman named Patricia, almost breathless. "I would have been terrified, but you just walked right up and handled it." "Well, someone had to," Brenda said, preening under the praise. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Honestly, I was shaking, but when she looked at me with that arrogant, superior attitude, I just snapped. And I don't regret it. I'd do it again. People like that need to be reminded that this world is ours, not theirs. We built it. It's ours." "What are you going to do about her?" another wife asked. "Derek's going to dig into her background and her mysterious fiancés," Brenda confided gleefully. "I bet they're dirty. Drug money, probably. As soon as he finds something, he can get a warrant. We'll run them out of town. You'll see. By Christmas, that house will be back on the market." The conversation continued in that vein for more than an hour, a cesspool of racism, gossip, and criminal conspiracy. They mocked Sienna's appearance. They speculated about her sex life. They laid out their plans for future harassment, all while laughing and drinking under the setting sun. They felt safe, nestled in the echo chamber of their own hatred, completely oblivious that their words were being recorded, their plans documented, and their fates sealed. In the command van, Adrian Crowe listened with a face carved from contained rage. He had dismantled organized crime families who spoke with more honor than these people. "We've got everything," the audio analyst said, removing his headphones. "Conspiracy to file a false police report. Conspiracy to conduct an illegal search. Multiple admissions of the original assault, plus a dozen potential hate crime enhancers. It's a gold mine." Director Adrian watched the drone's video feed, showing the small, cheerful gathering in the backyard. They looked so harmless, so typically American. But the audio told a different story. It was the story of a deep, festering rot. "They're not just celebrating an assault," Adrian said to the team assembled in the van. "They're celebrating a worldview. They're celebrating the idea that the rules don't apply to them, and that they have the right to terrorize anyone who doesn't look like them. Tomorrow morning, we're going to give them a lesson in reality." He looked at the tactical team leader. "Is the asset extraction plan finalized?" The team leader, a man with a grim face and a jaw like a steel trap, nodded. 0600, full dynamic entry. We'll be in and out before the neighbors finish their coffee." "Good," Adrian said. "Let them enjoy their party. Let them have one last night feeling powerful." He turned back to the monitors, his gaze cold and hard. "It's the last one they'll have for a very long time." The Last Supper of the condemned was drawing to a close. The guests were leaving. The grill was cooling. and the Langs were preparing for bed, the deep, untroubled sleep of the truly ignorant. They had no idea that only a few kilometers away, a team of highly trained federal agents was preparing to hold them accountable. Night settled over Oak Ridge Estates, wrapping the quiet cul-de-sac in a blanket of darkness and silence. For the Langs, it was a night like any other. They washed the dishes, watched a little mindless television, and by 10:30, they were in bed without guilt or fear. Their world was small, safe, and in their minds, perfectly under their control. They slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the righteous, oblivious to the storm gathering on the horizon. Across the street, the lights in Sienna Hale's house were also off, but she was not sleeping. She sat in a comfortable armchair in her upstairs bedroom, a cup of chamomile tea steaming gently on the table beside her. She wore a simple silk robe, her hair pulled back. The window offered a perfect, unobstructed view of the Lang house, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. She was calm. The fury of the previous days had settled into a deep, almost serene sense of inevitability. She was a woman waiting for a dawn she knew would change everything. Her secure satellite phone vibrated softly. She answered. "Adrian, I just needed to hear your voice," he said. His voice was quiet, intimate, a stark contrast to the dry, professional tone of the commander he had been all day. "The teams are in position. All assets are green, ready for 06. "I know," she said. "I can feel the calm before the storm. Are you sure you're all right?" he asked, the familiar note of concern in his voice. "It must be hard watching them, waiting." "Hard doesn't cover it," she admitted, lowering her voice to a whisper. "Every time I close my eyes, I feel that slap. I hear her words. Part of me wants to walk over there and—" Her voice trailed off. "I know," he said quietly, "but your way is better. Your strength, your discipline, that's the real power. They used brute force because it's all they have. You're using the full weight of the law. You're not just winning a fight. You're dismantling their entire world, piece by piece, without ever raising your voice. That's a victory that lasts." A small smile touched her lips. "You always know what to say. I'd rather be there with you," he said, holding your hand. "Soon," she answered. "First the business, then us." They stayed on the phone a few more minutes, talking about simple things, their wedding plans, the vacation they wanted to take, the color she was thinking of painting the dining room. It was an anchor of normalcy in a sea of abnormality, a reminder of the life they were fighting to protect. When they hung up, Sienna rose and walked to the window. She looked at the silent houses, the sleeping neighborhood. She thought of all the other people in other neighborhoods who had faced their own versions of the Langs, but did not have a direct line to the director of the FBI. She thought of the complaints buried in filing cabinets, the injustices ignored, the voices silenced. This was for them, too. This was for every person who had ever been told to know their place. A few kilometers away, in an anonymous industrial park, the final preparations were underway inside a large, unmarked warehouse that served as the FBI's tactical staging base. The atmosphere was one of quiet, focused intensity. 2 black armored tactical vans, known as war wagons, sat with engines idling softly. A team of 12 FBI SWAT agents, clad in matte black body armor, helmets, and night vision goggles, conducted final equipment checks. There was no noise, no bravado, only the soft click of magazine seating, the rustle of nylon straps being adjusted, and the quiet hum of sophisticated communications gear. The team leader, a man known only as Holt, gathered his men. "All right, listen up," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Targets are Derek and Brenda Lang. Derek is a local police sergeant. Assume he's armed. Brenda is the primary aggressor. Both are considered hostile. Our objective is total surprise and overwhelming force. We breach, we secure, we control. No cowboys. We do this by the book, clean and fast. Any questions? There were none. They had studied the Lang house floor plans for hours. They knew the layout better than the Langs themselves. They had thermal imagery of the bedroom, where the targets were sleeping. They knew which floorboards creaked. At 5:45, they climbed into the vans. The heavy doors closed with a solid, final thud. The convoy rolled out of the industrial park. 2 armored vans and 3 chase cars, moving like ghosts through the pre-dawn darkness. They drove through the sleepy suburban streets without headlights, their drivers navigating by night vision. As they turned onto the final street leading into the Oak Ridge cul-de-sac, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hints of dawn. The air was cool and still. It was the perfect moment of peace before controlled chaos erupted. From her window, Sienna watched the dark silhouettes of the vans glide silently into position at both ends of the street, cutting off any escape. She saw dark figures disembark, moving with fluid, predatory grace across the well-kept lawns. The stillness of the morning was about to be irrevocably broken. The hammer of federal power was raised, ready to fall. The digital clock on the Lang's nightstand ticked from 5:59 to 6. In the silent pre-dawn gloom of the master bedroom, the change was imperceptible. Derek and Brenda Lang still slept, wrapped in the blissful ignorance that had defined their lives. At that precise moment, the world as they knew it ceased to exist. The first sound was not a knock, it was an explosion. A controlled detonation charge placed on the front door lock blasted the mechanism inward with a deafening crack that was more physical concussion than noise. The heavy oak door, symbol of their suburban security, slammed open, slamming against the interior wall and splintering the frame. Simultaneously, the large picture window of their living room disintegrated into a million glittering fragments as a flashbang grenade arced through the air and detonated inside. The resulting explosion of light and sound was blinding, deafening, and completely disorienting, designed to incapacitate anyone within its radius. "Federal agents! Search warrant!" The shouts were a synchronized, terrifying roar from a dozen different throats, amplified and inhuman. Derek Lang jerked upright into a state of pure primal terror, heart hammering against his ribs. His first thought, the conditioned reflex of a man who saw threats everywhere, was that they were being invaded, robbed. He rolled out of bed, groping in the darkness for the 9mm pistol he kept in the nightstand drawer. He never found it. Before his fingers could even touch the cold steel of the gun, the bedroom door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by a battering ram. The doorway filled with a terrifying silhouette, a massive figure in full tactical gear, helmet, and night vision goggles glowing with an eerie predatory green. A brilliant tactical flashlight attached to the agent's rifle pinned Derek against the wall, searing his vision. "Hands! Show me your hands now!" the agent bellowed. Derek froze, hands half raised, unable to process the speed and violence of the intrusion. This was not a robbery. This was something else. This was military. On the other side of the bed, Brenda was screaming, a high, hysterical wail of pure panic. She pulled the sheets up to her chin, cowering against the headboard as 2 more agents flooded the room, weapons trained on her. "On the floor, face down," an agent ordered Derek. A heavy boot kicked the backs of his knees, and he collapsed onto the carpet. In seconds, his hands were yanked behind his back, and the cold, tight bite of plastic zip ties dug into his wrists. "What is this? Who are you?" he mumbled, face pressed into the carpet, the smell of his own fear filling his nostrils. "FBI," the agent growled in his ear. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." Downstairs, the house was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The 12-man team moved with the fluid, brutal efficiency of a well-oiled machine. They swept through the house at full speed, clearing rooms and shouting, "Clear!" They kicked open doors. They checked closets. The entire house, the Lang's castle, was secured and under federal control in less than 90 seconds. Outside, the cul-de-sac had erupted. Lights came on in every house. Sleepy, confused neighbors peered through their blinds, pale with shock. They saw the armored vans, the heavily armed men in black, the shattered facade of the Lang house. It looked like a scene from a war movie on their quiet, peaceful street. They saw Derek and Brenda, dressed only in their pajamas, he in underwear and a t-shirt, she in a silk nightgown, being unceremoniously dragged out the front door. Brenda was still screaming, her cries incoherent. "My husband is a police officer. You can't do this. We have rights." "They're reading you your rights, ma'am," an agent said calmly, his voice a stark contrast to her hysteria as he guided her toward an unmarked car waiting at the curb. "Please get in the vehicle." Derek was silent, his face contorted with disbelief and growing horror. The cocky, confident bully of the previous week had vanished, replaced by a terrified, confused man in his underwear. As they pushed him toward a car, he caught a fleeting glimpse of his neighbors' faces in the windows, wide-eyed and stunned. The humiliation was a physical blow, more shocking than any punch. Then his gaze drifted across the street. In the window of their house opposite, only one light was on. A figure stood there, partially hidden by the shadows, watching the scene. It was Sienna Hale. She held a cup of coffee, her expression one of perfect, terrifying calm. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second across the battlefield of their immaculate lawns. And in that instant, Derek Lang understood. The incomprehensible violence, the overwhelming force, the military precision. It all made sense. This was not about drugs. This was not a robbery. This was about her, the woman he had dismissed, harassed, and allowed his wife to assault. He had believed her a nobody. He had made a catastrophic, world-ending mistake. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. This was not a local dispute. Somehow, in his arrogant stupidity, he had picked a fight with the gods, and they had just descended from Olympus to drag him to hell. As the car door slammed shut, plunging him into darkness, the only image burned into his mind was her serene, triumphant face in the window across the street. The hammer had fallen, and his world shattered. The cold, sterile environment of an FBI field office interrogation room is designed to strip away every last vestige of power and comfort. There are no windows. The walls are a flat gray that absorbs sound. The furniture consists of a single, heavy steel table bolted to the floor and 3 hard plastic chairs. It is a sensory isolation chamber where the only thing that matters is the truth, and the agents who work there are experts at extracting it. Derek and Brenda Lang were processed and placed in 2 separate rooms at opposite ends of a long, silent hallway. Their pajamas were taken and replaced with shapeless gray jumpsuits. Photographs, fingerprints, and DNA samples were collected. The entire process was cold, efficient, and utterly dehumanizing. The last remnants of their suburban identity were stripped away, leaving them exposed and terrified. Derek sat alone for what felt like an eternity. The silence pressed in on him. The adrenaline of the raid had long since faded, replaced by a nauseating mixture of fear and confusion. He tried to reconstruct it. The FBI. A full tactical raid. For what? A neighborhood fight? It made no sense. He kept coming back to Sienna's face in the window, but his mind could not make the leap. Who was she? Finally, the door opened. A man in a tailored dark suit entered. He was not a SWAT agent. He was older, around 50, with a penetrating, intelligent gaze and a calm, confident bearing that was far more intimidating than any body armor. He was Special Agent Reyes, the lead investigator. He sat across from Derek and placed a thin file on the table between them. He did not open it. "Sergeant Lang," Reyes began in a quiet, familiar voice. "I'm going to be very direct with you. Your life, as you know it, is over. The only thing we're here to determine is how much time you'll spend in a federal penitentiary." Derek swallowed hard, his throat dry. He tried to summon the bravado of his police persona. "I don't know what this is about," he blustered. "I'm a cop. I have rights. I want my union rep and a lawyer." "You'll get a lawyer," Reyes said gently. "But let's not waste each other's time with the thin blue line routine. Your badge means nothing in this room. In fact, it's the reason the charges you're facing are so severe. You swore an oath to uphold the law, and you used it as a weapon to terrorize a civilian." Reyes leaned slightly forward. "This is about Sienna Hale." Derek's heart clenched. It was her. "It was a neighborhood dispute," he stammered. "A misunderstanding." "Was it a misunderstanding when you used your patrol car to shine a spotlight into her house for a full minute, Sergeant?" Reyes asked, his voice still quiet, but now edged with steel. "Was it a misunderstanding when you followed her in your cruiser? Or when you conspired with your wife to run an illegal background check on her and her fiancé, with the intent of fabricating an excuse for a search warrant?" Derek's face went pale. They knew everything. How was that possible? Reyes smiled, a cold, humorless expression. He reached out and touched a small speaker on the table. He pressed a button. Derek's own voice filled the silent room, tinny and distorted but unmistakably his. "Run a full background check. See what skeletons come out of the closet. Maybe we can get a warrant. Toss the place." The recording stopped. Derek stared at the speaker as if it were a snake. The barbecue. They had recorded the barbecue. In the interrogation room at the far end of the hallway, Brenda Lang was attempting a different tactic. She was playing the victim. She sat hunched in her chair, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, performing theatrical distress for the agent seated across from her. "I don't understand," Brenda sobbed. "We were asleep. Those men with guns broke down our door. I'm a mother, a wife. I'm the head of the neighborhood watch. I'm a good person." The agent, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Soto, let her cry for a moment before speaking. "Mrs. Lang," she said in a voice devoid of sympathy, "let's talk about Saturday morning. Let's talk about your interaction with your new neighbor, Sienna Hale." Brenda's tears dried as if by magic, and her expression hardened. "That woman is the problem. She's aggressive. She threatened me. I was afraid for my life." "Afraid for your life," Agent Soto repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Interesting, because we have a video of the incident. Would you like to see it?" She turned a laptop on the table to face Brenda and pressed play. The screen showed the crisp, high-definition video from Sienna's security camera. It showed Brenda storming onto the lawn. It showed her pointing and screaming. The audio was perfect. "We don't want people like you here. Go back to the ghetto you came from." Then came the slap. The horrible, violent crack filled the room. Brenda stared at the screen, face ashen. The video was irrefutable. It showed her as the sole aggressor, her words clear evidence of the racist motive behind the attack. "That video has been edited. It's fake," she stammered, her voice rising in panic. Agent Soto did not respond. She simply closed the laptop. "The video is real, Mrs. Lang. So are the statements from the 2 delivery men you harassed. And so is the audio recording from your backyard barbecue where you admitted the assault and conspired with your husband to escalate your campaign of harassment." Brenda's bravado shattered. The mask of the righteous suburban matron dissolved, revealing the terrified, cornered bully underneath. The world she had controlled with mockery and threats had just been obliterated by irrefutable high-tech evidence. Back in Derek's room, Agent Reyes slid a photograph across the table. It was a snapshot of Sienna Hale laughing with an attractive, powerful-looking man. The man had his arm around her. The photo had been taken at a law enforcement charity gala. The man was Director Adrian Crowe. "Do you know who that is, Sergeant?" Reyes asked. Derek looked at the photo and recognized the man instantly. Every cop in the state knew who Director Crowe was. He was a legend, a ghost who ran the most powerful law enforcement agency in the region. That's Director Crowe," Derek whispered, his voice cracking. "Correct," Reyes said. "And the woman he has his arm around, the woman your wife assaulted, the woman you terrorized for a week, is his fiancé." The final piece of the puzzle locked into place, and the catastrophic magnitude of his stupidity slammed into Derek Lang with the force of a physical blow. The room spun. He had picked a fight with the family of the most powerful law enforcement official in the state. He put his head in his hands. It was over. Everything was over. There would be no union rep, no friendly captain to fix it. He had not merely stepped on a landmine. He had dropped an atomic bomb on his own life. The unraveling was complete. All that remained was to calculate the cost. The hours following their interrogations were a slow, methodical dismantling of the Langs' lives. While they sat in separate cells, contemplating the wreckage, the full coordinated power of the federal government was brought to bear not only on their freedom, but on every aspect of their existence. This was not merely about punishment. It was about eradication. It was about setting an example so profound that no one in a position of power in the state would ever again think this kind of behavior was acceptable. An independent team from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, armed with a warrant signed by a federal judge even before the raid began, descended on the Langs' bank. Their accounts, checking, savings, Derek's pension fund, Brenda's small investment portfolio, were frozen instantly. All assets were locked pending a full forensic audit to trace the source of Derek's undeclared cash deposits and Brenda's private investigator slush fund. The comfortable financial cushion on which they had built their lives vanished at the touch of a key. Simultaneously, a federal prosecutor presented the preliminary evidence to a grand jury. The case was overwhelming. A slam dunk built on a mountain of irrefutable video, audio, and financial evidence. The formal indictment was returned before lunch. The charges were devastating. For Brenda Lang, one count of committing a hate crime resulting in bodily injury, a serious federal felony carrying a mandatory minimum sentence, one count of conspiracy to deprive a citizen of her civil rights, one count of witness tampering for her preemptively falsified police report. For Derek Lang, one count of conspiracy to deprive a citizen of her civil rights under color of law, the under color of law enhancement significantly aggravating the charge, one count of falsifying a police report, one count of conspiracy to obstruct justice. And after the initial financial audit revealed the pattern of suspicious deposits, multiple counts of money laundering and theft of public funds were added. But the criminal charges were only one front in this war. The second front was civil, and it was designed to be equally ruinous. By late afternoon, two attorneys, one for Derek, one for Brenda, both looking shell-shocked and out of their depth, were ushered into a conference room at the local FBI office. Waiting for them were the lead federal prosecutor and a woman they did not recognize, an elegant, impeccably dressed attorney from the most prestigious civil rights firm in the country. She represented Sienna Hale. "Gentlemen," the prosecutor began, "your clients are facing a minimum of 5 to 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The evidence against them is, to put it mildly, overwhelming. We will not be offering a plea deal." Then the civil attorney spoke. "In addition to the criminal charges, she said in a calm, precise voice. "My client, Ms. Hale, is filing a civil lawsuit against both Mr. and Mrs. Lang. We are suing for assault, battery, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of her civil rights." She slid a thick legal document across the table to each of them. "We are seeking compensatory damages," she continued, "for medical expenses and the cost of enhanced security Ms. Hale was forced to implement, for the emotional trauma of the racial attack, and punitive damages to punish the defendants for their malicious and intentional conduct." One of the attorneys flipped to the last page, eyes searching for the figure. He stopped, jaw slack. "You're asking for $100,000? He asked in a tone of disbelief. "That is correct," the attorney replied without blinking. "And given that your client's assets are frozen as part of the criminal investigation, we have already filed a lien against their primary residence in Oak Ridge Estates. Guilty or not in criminal court, we will win this civil case, and we will take their house." The attorneys sat in stunned silence. It was a scorched earth legal strategy. The Langs would not only go to prison, they would lose everything. Their home, their savings, their future. They would walk out of prison with only the clothes on their backs and a debt they could never repay. When the attorneys delivered the news to their respective clients in their cells, the reality of their situation finally crushed them. Brenda, upon learning she would lose her home, the symbol of her entire identity and social standing, broke down in inconsolable sobs. The house was her kingdom, her fortress, the source of her power. Without it, she was nothing. Derek's reaction was different. Upon hearing the list of charges, the prison sentence, and the financial ruin, he did not cry. A strange, terrifying calm settled over him. He finally understood the magnitude of the power he had provoked. This was not justice. This was targeted demolition. He remembered that first day, watching Sienna in her red dress. He had wondered how she could afford to live in their neighborhood. The irony was a bitter, choking pill. He had questioned her wealth, and in doing so had guaranteed his own poverty. He now understood that the price of his hatred was everything he had ever had and everything he would ever have. The calculation was incomplete, and the sum was total annihilation. The trial of the United States versus the Langs was brief and brutal. In the sterile mahogany confines of a federal courtroom, the tyrants of Oak Ridge Estates looked small, diminished, and utterly pathetic. The case drew local media attention, a salacious story of suburban hate and the fall of power. The courtroom filled daily with journalists, curious Oak Ridge neighbors, and activists from civil rights groups. The prosecution, led by an assistant U.S. attorney famous for her relentlessness, presented its case with the cold, methodical precision of a surgeon. They needed no inflammatory rhetoric. The evidence spoke for itself, and it was devastating. First came the video, projected onto a giant screen for the jury. The crisp images of Brenda Lang's racist tirade and the subsequent assault on Sienna Hale silenced the entire room. The dry crack of the slap echoed through the cavernous space, a sound of pure malice. The jury watched with grim, impassive faces. Next came the audio from the backyard barbecue. Jurors wearing headphones listened as the Langs and their friends laughed, joked, and conspired. Their words were a testament to their deep prejudice and their arrogant belief in their own impunity. Derek's boastful confession about how his captain would bury the complaint was particularly damning. Captain Frank Harlan, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, took the stand looking ashamed and defeated. Under oath, he admitted that he had deliberately dismissed Sienna's complaint without proper investigation in order to protect his sergeant. His testimony shattered the blue wall of silence and exposed the informal corruption that had enabled Derek Lang's behavior for years. The two delivery men, called by the prosecution, gave their eyewitness testimony. It was simple, direct, and powerful, corroborating every detail of Sienna's account. When Sienna Hale took the stand, silence fell over the courtroom. She was the picture of grace and dignity, dressed in a simple but elegant gray suit. She recounted the events with the same unshakable calm she had shown from the beginning. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply stated the facts. The defense attorney, a public defender who knew he was fighting a lost battle, tried to trap her on cross-examination. "Ms. Hale," he began, "isn't it true that you were condescending toward Mrs. Lang? That you provoked her?" Sienna looked at him, then turned her gaze to the jury. "I told Mrs. Lang that I felt sorry for her," she said in a clear, firm voice. "And I did. I feel sorry for anyone whose heart is so full of hate that their only response to a new neighbor is suspicion and violence. That is not provocation. That is a tragedy." The defense collapsed. They had no counter-argument, no evidence to refute the mountain of proof presented by the prosecution. Derek and Brenda Lang did not testify. Their lawyers knew that putting their clients before the jury would be an act of professional suicide. After 3 short days, the prosecution rested. The jury was sent to deliberate. They returned in less than an hour. The court clerk received the verdict from the foreman. In the case of the United States versus Brenda Lang, on the charge of hate crime resulting in bodily injury, "How do you find?" The foreman cleared his throat and looked directly at Brenda. "Guilty." A choked sob escaped Brenda's lips. "On the charge of conspiracy," the clerk continued in a monotone, fatal voice. "Guilty." The litany continued, a drumbeat of conviction for both of them. Guilty. 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 With each pronouncement, Derek Lang seemed to shrink in his chair, while Brenda stared straight ahead, face pale and streaked with tears of disbelief. The judge, an imposing woman known for her stern demeanor, thanked the jury and then turned her steely gaze on the defendants for sentencing. "Mr. Lang," the judge began in a voice dripping with contempt, "you were a sworn officer of the law. You were given a badge, a gun, and the trust of this community. You betrayed that trust in the most despicable way possible. You used your power not to protect, but to persecute. You are a disgrace to the uniform you once wore. I hereby sentence you to 4 years in federal prison." Derek Lang covered his head with his hands and wept. The judge then turned to Brenda. "Mrs. Lang, you were the catalyst for this entire sordid affair. Your heart is poisoned by a racism so deep it led you to physically assault a woman for the sole crime of moving into your neighborhood. You wrapped your hatred in the flag of community standards, but this jury saw it for what it was: pure bigotry. Because you initiated the violence and your actions were clearly motivated by racial animus, I sentence you to 6 years in federal prison." 6 years. A murmur of surprise ran through the courtroom. It was a harsher sentence than her husband's. The judge had sent a clear message. The instigator of hate would answer even more severely. "Additionally," the judge added, "this court affirms the civil judgment against you. You will pay $100,000 in damages. Take them away." As U.S. Marshals led the sobbing, broken couple out of the courtroom to begin their new lives as convicted felons, Sienna Hale stood. She had watched the entire proceedings without the slightest display of emotion. She did not smile in triumph. She did not look relieved. She simply looked resolved. She had not sought revenge. She had sought justice. And justice, slow and arduous, but in the end inexorable, had been delivered. She turned and walked out of the silent courtroom, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 destroyed lives. The price of hate had been paid in full. Time passed. Spring returned to Oak Ridge Estates, breathing new life into the quiet, well-kept streets. The dogwoods were heavy with white blossoms, and the air was sweet with the scent of freshly cut grass. The cul-de-sac where the Langs once lived was peaceful. The memory of the violent raid and the subsequent media circus had faded into the realm of neighborhood legend. The former Lang house, sold at a federal auction to cover a fraction of the damages owed to Sienna, now had new owners. A young doctor, his wife, and their 2 small children had moved in. Their laughter as they played in the front yard was a healing sound, a cleansing of the bitterness that had once flooded the property. Sienna, now Sienna Crow, after marrying Adrian in a quiet autumn ceremony, sat on the porch of her home with a glass of iced tea in her hand. She watched the new family play, a soft smile on her lips. Her life was peaceful, a peace she had fought for and won. The neighborhood had changed. The horrible incident had forced a reckoning among the residents. The Homeowners Association, under new leadership, had launched a community outreach program. People were kinder, more open. The hard shell of their exclusive bubble had been cracked, and a little of the real world, in all its diversity, had been allowed to shine through. Adrian's car, a sleek, understated black sedan, pulled into the driveway. He climbed out, shedding his suit jacket as he walked up the path. He was no longer Director Crow, the formidable head of the FBI. He was just Adrian, a man coming home to his wife. He leaned down and kissed her. "How was your day?" she asked, offering him her glass of iced tea. "Quiet," he said, taking a sip, which was always a good thing in his line of work. He settled into the chair beside her, relaxing as he shed the immense weight of his responsibilities. "I got a report from the Bureau of Prisons today." Sienna's expression did not change, but she went still. "Oh?" "Derek Lang is serving his time at a low-security facility. He's a model inmate. Keeps his head down, works in the library. He'll be out in 2 years if he behaves." "And Brenda?" Sienna asked softly. Adrian's expression darkened. "That's a different story. She was sent to the federal women's prison in West Virginia. She hasn't adjusted well. She's been in solitary 3 times for fighting with other inmates. Apparently, her attitude hasn't made her many friends there." Sienna was silent for a long time, watching the happy scene across the street. "I don't take pleasure in their suffering, Adrian," she said quietly. "But I don't regret the consequences. They built their own prisons long before the government surrounded them with walls. A prison of hate, of fear, of ignorance." "I know," he said, taking her hand. "But what you did mattered. It sent a message that resonated far beyond this street. Captain Harlan was forced into early retirement. The Department of Justice completely overhauled the 12th Precinct. Your case became a national training model for identifying and prosecuting hate crimes that disguise themselves as neighborhood disputes." He looked at her with deep love and respect. "You didn't just stop 2 bullies, Sienna. You changed the system. You took a hit, and in doing so you exposed a deep rot. You bled to prove the disease was real." Sienna rested her head on his shoulder. The late-day sun warmed her skin. She thought of the ugly red mark on her cheek, now faded, a ghost of a memory. The scar was gone, but the lesson remained. True strength does not lie in the power to strike a blow. It lies in the discipline to withstand one. It is the serene, unshakable dignity that refuses to be diminished. It is the quiet determination that trusts the slow, powerful arc of the moral universe as it bends, inexorably, toward justice. She had proven that in the face of intolerance, the most powerful response is not to sink to its level, but to rise so far above it that its ugliness is exposed for all the world to see. And here our story ends. A new day has dawned in Oak Ridge, not only for Sienna, but for the entire community. What do you think of the sentences handed down? Were 6 years for Brenda and 4 for Derek, a fair reflection of their crimes. And what does it say about a person when their first instinct upon meeting a new neighbor is not curiosity, but contempt? Share your thoughts in the comments. We value your perspective. If this story of poetic justice and unbreakable dignity moved you, please support it by liking and subscribing to the channel for more important stories.